Okay, I gave you an overview of the text. Now I'm going to go into the actual text itself. We're going to talk about reading and sequencing a story. Okay? You need to read the text. No, really, you need to read it. Okay? Reading comprehension is learned through practice. I've given you the tools to make sense of the passage. That's what this in-depth exercise is. They will never do this on the exam ever. Okay? This is just in case you need more practice. Now, sometimes people have told me they have difficulty following along the ideas in the passage or the paragraph. You can use your finger to hold your place if necessary. Okay? You could point right at the sentence and go along every line as you read it out. Okay? In your head. Have the text out in front of you. You need to have this text out. Okay? That's just it. Get out a glove. This may seem very strange, but this will help with some of the sequencing exercises. If you have a winter glove or a latex glove or something of that nature, you can put it on your desk or wherever you are. This may actually be helpful for the sequencing. Okay? I used to toss out a brown sock, and later I actually made a prosthetic monkey's hand that I would do when I taught this lesson. I need you to think about the wishes and the sequence of events in the plot. It's very important. Okay? This is primarily a sequence exercise to get you thinking about how things happen in what order. Okay? So I'll give you a moment if you haven't already. Again, I'm really not kidding. You have to read this. Press the pause button on your phone or mobile device or the space bar on your keyboard. Okay? What is sequencing? Sequencing is the logical ordering of events. How can we use sequencing skills to make sense in a story? You could figure the order something is related in the story's plot, or the order it happened in time. Okay? In this story, the sergeant major talks about some events that happened prior to the story. Okay? How are the events sequenced in the monkey's paw? Looking at wishes is one way to determine this. We're going to do that extensively. Okay? All right. And what I want you to do is to go back and read the text. Think about the three wishes. What are the three wishes? Go find them right now. We're going to talk about the first wish first, but go look back in the text and find it. Okay? So right now, take out your text, find the first wish. You read it already? Find the first wish. Okay? I'll give you one moment. Remember, you could pause this video at any time. Okay, I'm back. The first wish was 200 quid. Did it go wrong? Remember, Sergeant Major Morris had said, every one of these wishes goes terribly wrong. How did it go wrong? Okay, think about that. I'll give you a moment if you want to pause or find the text of the passage where it went wrong. Okay, so they got the 200 quid from a payout after their son was killed in an industrial accident at work. He works at a factory. Okay? Now, what's wish number 2? I'll give you a moment to go back and look at the text. Go find that. Okay? Remember, as always, you could pause, pressing the space bar or tapping your phone or mobile device. Okay, we're back. Wish 2. He wishes for his son to be alive again. Did it go wrong? Okay, did it go wrong? You see that passage right there. Did it go wrong? Okay, I'll give you another moment to go look for that. Okay, we're back. Yes, it could have gone horribly wrong because there's a knocking at the door. And the Mrs. White insinuates that that's her returned son. And Mr. White, how does he feel? He thinks maybe that's the case, or it's a horrible zombie. So wish 3. What's wish 3? This is kind of a tricky question. I need you to look carefully at the text. I'll give you a moment to do so. Okay, and we pulled that up right there. You see there, Mr. White makes a wish. Never states what it is. What do you think it is? So what 3 wishes do you think Sergeant Major Morris made? Okay, this is reinforcement. Write this in your notebook or in the forums on the Blackboard course below. Write a response to the literature that describes them. And where in the story would this take place? Write it down. Okay? Write down those 3 wishes you think Sergeant Major Morris made. And where in the story would it take place? Okay? So 2 separate questions. Okay. We're going to go into chance or choice, examining who's at the door. Okay, remember, we kind of left that dangling with the 3rd wish. We're going to talk about that a little more in this lesson. So chance or choice. Do you think the story is ultimately supernatural? Remember, we've talked about cause and effect a little bit. Why or why not? Cite evidence from the story. Go back and look at the text. Why do you think it's supernatural? Why don't you? Why do you think everyone in the story believes it is supernatural? Is fear a natural response to men in crisis? What do you think you'd do in the same situation? Do you think their responses are natural responses? Yeah, maybe. Yeah, sure. Crazy things are happening. This seems like a very odd coincidence. Okay? So they might say that their reaction is somewhat normal. It's fearful. Okay? Looking back, what foreshadowing is there in the first passage, and what does it foreshadow? So let's look back at the first passage in the story. Okay? Without, the night was cold and wet, but in the small parlor of Laburnum Villa, the blinds were drawn and the fire burned brightly. Okay? So it was cold and wet outside, but it was nice indoors. Okay? So that foreshadows it's cold and wet outside. It was a dark and stormy night. What does that foreshadow? Probably something bad. What is some evidence of the characters' relationships to each other? In the introduction, I was kind enough to tell you how they were related, but how would you find out if they're related if you didn't know that? On the GED exam, you will be asked to do that. Now, in the very first paragraph, it says, father and son were at chess, the former who possessed ideas about the game involving radical changes, etc., etc. It even provoked comment from the white-haired old lady knitting placidly by the fire. Hark at the wind, said Mr. White, etc., etc. Okay, and so we know they're father and son playing chess. And we're going to assume the old lady knitting placidly by the fire is probably Mrs. White. But we don't necessarily know that until later. They mention the son by name a few paragraphs down. There he is, said Herbert White, as the gate banged too loudly and heavy footsteps came toward the door. Okay? Sergeant Major Morris gets introduced and a little bit after that. But we get the idea, oh, Sergeant Major Morris. The old man rose with hospitable haste and opening the door and heard condoling with the new arrival. The new arrival also condoled with himself, so that Mrs. White said, "Tut, tut," and coughed gently as her husband entered the room, followed by a tall, burly man, beady of eye and rubicund of visage. Sergeant Major Morris, he said, introducing him. The sergeant major shook hands and, taking the proffered seat by the fire, watched contentedly while his host got out whiskey and tumblers and stood a small copper kettle on the fire. Okay, so then you have him talking a little later, Mr. White. They obviously know each other, Mr. White and Sergeant Major Morris. And Mrs. White, when he shows up at the door, already has something to say, "Tut, tut," okay, and coughed gently as her husband entered the room. So she's she's not a big fan of this fella. Okay? 21 years of it, said Mr. White, nodding at his wife and son. When he went away, he was a slip of youth in the warehouse. Now look at him. Okay? So that's how some time has passed. Okay? And Sergeant Major Morris had been to India. He's telling these stories. Mr. White seems very interested. Okay, so their relationship to each other, we can tell, okay, they know each other. How do they feel about each other? You learned a lot just from that first passage Mr. Morris and Sergeant Major Morris. Mr. Morris almost looks up to Sergeant Major Morris because he has all these adventures. Okay? And the last thing I want to ask, what do you think Mr. White wished for and why? So we got to go back to the text. And if you look closely at the last wish, okay? Let's look at the last wish on page 14. And at the same moment he found the monkey's paw and frantically breathed his third and final wish. The knocking ceased suddenly, although echoes of it were still in the house. Okay? So they don't specifically say what the wish is, but it's implied that it's probably that his son was no longer back from the dead. Okay? Since it stopped, we can infer that since in this story the characters all think the monkey's paw's wishes caused things to happen, that what he wished for must have been for that to stop. Okay? So reinforcement. Do you think Herbert is really at the door? What do you think? Do you think it's coincidence or supernatural? Why or why not? Support with textual evidence. I want you to do that either on the Blackboard forum for this lesson or in your notebooks for the YouTube course. Okay? We talked about sequencing. We went through all this already. Okay, and that's it. That's the end of the in-depth exercise, and I will see you next time.